Okay, hello and welcome to another Maine GIS User Group Virtual Lunch and Learn. I'm Patrick Cunningham, and along with Matt Doobie, we are your moderators for today's event. Everybody should be muted in listen-only mode, but if you have any questions or comments, you can certainly put them in the chat. And I think we'll have a question and answer section on this one more at the end of the presentations, because it's kind of a panelist kind of presentation today. Very excited to get started with this one, which will be on remote sensing inventory and monitoring of Maine's forest resources with folks from Maine DEP and MNAP. And here's some info on those folks, our panel. Matt's going to introduce them in a few moments, but you can see there are a variety of folks from University of Maine system. We're really excited to hear what they have to share from us from the School of Forestry and the Wheatland Lab. And I guess because there's only a couple moderators, we get bigger pictures, so you get to look more closely at our ugly mugs. Sorry about that. But I am a board member at large, been with me for a few years now, and Matt is now our vice chair. And it looks like, yeah, that's correct, vice chair, sorry. So about Maine GIS User Group, if you're not familiar with us, here's some pictures of what we do in normal times. And that is we get together a lot and we present and talk about GIS and Maine GIS in particular, though we don't discriminate. We're open to GIS from anywhere. But we typically have 3 or 4 in-person meetings a year. We have our annual meeting, we do an educators conference, and we also like to try to fill in that with lightning talks and mappy hours. And we try to do that throughout the state. We typically do pretty good with the southern and central Maine areas, but we also try to make sure that we get up to the county and the top of Maine as well periodically. Unfortunately, as you know, we really haven't been able to do much of that over the past almost 2 years now. But we're hoping to maybe at some point get some in-person events going again. And until at such time as we can do that, we're going to continue with our virtual lunch and learn. So we're really happy to have a great new kind of presentation with this panelist group. And we're really happy to have you folks here attending and hopefully participating with questions and comments later on. How can you get involved in MEGUG? Well, you can do what you're doing right now, which is participate and attend our events. But you also could present. We would love to hear from you. And we say this time and time again, it does not have to be a perfect scientific study that has an amazing conclusion. We want to talk GIS, and part of GIS and part of science are mistakes, or maybe finding things that you didn't expect, or inconclusive findings. That's okay too. The techniques that you use, the approaches that you use, the software that you use, folks want to hear about that. We want to talk about it. We want to share and learn. So we would love to have more presentations, and we are in need of those. So you can let us know if you're interested with the email below, megugboard@gmail.com. But there are other ways you can help out if you don't want to present. You can make sure that you're a member. Is your membership in active standing? Have you paid up, and have you made sure that we have all your contact information? Is your organization interested in being a sponsor and supporting Blue Marble? Like our sponsors that we have right here, Sewell Company, Blue Marble, and Esri are gold sponsors for MEGUG. But we also have many companies that sponsor at the bronze and silver level, and we thank them as well. If you would like to be active, you could join a committee or working group. We have a variety of committees and working groups. I think that's the next slide. Or you could also run for the board, and we do elections every year in the fall. Some of our committees: education, membership. Those are probably pretty straightforward. We certainly always looking for folks that are involved in education to participate. Membership is about getting the word out and increasing membership with MEGUG. Our program committee does things like this and our in-person events. Publicity, pretty straightforward. Sponsorship is getting more sponsors. We are always open to having help with our finance committee, And then periodically we do investigate our bylaws and policies. So if any of that appeals to you, just let us know. We'd love to have you. And yes, volunteering can help contribute towards your GISP certification if you're interested in that. This is the current makeup of the board. Andy is our chair. And I think you're familiar with some of these other folks. We have some newer members, Glenn and Diana, and we're so happy that they ran and joined the board in this past November. Upcoming events, well, as I said, we don't have a lot of talks yet slated, so we have open slots. Next month in February, we're looking for someone if anyone's interested in presenting at a Lunch and Learn. And then it looks like for March, we have confirmed a talk from Katie Corl at UMaine Augusta and Matt McCourt from UMaine Farmington on trauma-informed emergency management and a future professionals master's in GIS. So that should be interesting. I look for registration information on that very soon. And then other things we have going on, we're always looking to grant scholarships and opportunities from our educational endowments. If you're interested in that, please let us know. If you're a student, we would love to help you out. And then we have our MEGUG poster contest for University of Maine and college students, and look for more information coming on that soon as well. 90% of these Lunch and Learns have been recorded and posted to YouTube. Unfortunately, last month's presentation didn't get recorded. This one I know is being recorded. So if you miss it, you want to go back and watch it, or you have a colleague that missed it, I should say, just shoot them over to our YouTube channel and you can watch these great talks that we've had. And please subscribe and like all of our social. Oops. Here, I'm going to hand it over to Matt to give some brief introductions to our speakers today.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. We have a group of folks with us here today who are from the Wheatland Lab at the University of Maine School of Forest Resources. So I'm going to say something brief about all of them so they come from different career arcs within the Wheatland Lab. So I'm just going to go across the row here. Tony Guay is a remote sensing technical specialist with the lab. He's also the chair of the Maine Geospatial Institute, which is the University of Maine system collaborative of geospatial scientists. Dan Hayes is an associate professor in the School of Forestry. He's been involved in many longstanding research projects around ecology and forestry. Sylvia Norales is doing a PhD in spatial models of biomass, so that should be very interesting. David Sanderson is a remote sensing technician, survey pilot that supports the lab. And also we have Stephanie Wilsey, who's a master's student working on best practices for LiDAR forest inventories. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Wheatland Lab so we can get into our presentation.
All right, I'm Dan, thanks for the introductions there. I'll get us started. We'll hear more about the Wheatland Lab itself as we go through the presentation. But I wanted to start and just give an overview, kind of a larger scale research that we do here at the Research Lab. And then we'll hear from the others working on the specific projects. So to start, we do a bunch of various research looking at modeling and mapping as well as monitoring changes in Maine's forest resources. And I should mention Maine and beyond as we'll see a little bit in some of the presentations. I'm going to just start quickly and go over some of the context for this. And I know there's a lot on this slide, but there's a link there if you want more information. But we had gotten together with some other of the researchers in the School of Forest Resources here at UMaine and put together a carbon budget for the state of Maine. This was kind of born out of some of the more global and continental US work we've done, and looked at the role that forests play in the state's budget. And it turns out that forests are a large part of the carbon budget. As we know, we're almost 90% of forest cover in the state. And when you pull the numbers together, those forests can take up and store, both in the forest and in the woods product sector, almost 3/4 of the emissions that come from fossil fuels in the state. And so this is was an interesting result and something that we're moving forward with. As you can see up here, this is version 1.0, and we're working with the state of Maine on the greenhouse gas counting and emissions reporting and putting together these budgets going forward. And so we're bringing to bear a lot of the technologies that we're talking about here in geospatial science, remote sensing. And one of the big initiatives that we have is being as part of the NASA Carbon Monitoring System science team. And this is a place where we're putting together a bunch of different remote sensing and geospatial tools within some landscape modeling frameworks that we can look at lots of different pieces of the puzzle, basically, in terms of mapping forest species, disturbances, and forest ages, as well as a bunch of parameters that are important ecologically that can go into these models and then eventually project into the future and look at how these forests might be responding to changes in management and climate change. And in the future, are these forests still going to be taking up 3/4 of our emissions, or are they going to go one way or the other? And these are tools that we can develop to help people make decisions based on that kind of information. So just going through some of the pieces of this, there's lots of it, but we do a lot of different work with various remote sensing modalities or technologies to look at mapping forest biomass, so the carbon content of the forest at any given time, as well as all the changes that go on. And so here's an example from a previous, not too long ago, graduated PhD student, Elias Airy, who took all of the publicly available LiDAR data that we had available at the time. We've been able to fill in a little bit of this since in the last couple of years, but he was used various techniques, which Stephanie will talk about, to map the biomass content based on LiDAR across this large region. Pretty unprecedented and pretty impressive work there. But that kind of gives us the state of the forest at one particular time. But as we know, these things are changing, and so we bring other tools to bear, like the going through the Landsat record that can go all the way back to the 70s, and be able to look at how these forests have changed over time. And so another graduate student that's now at Oregon State University, Jack Kilbride, had put together on the Google Earth Engine the land trender algorithm and ran it over Maine, well, actually quite a bit of the Northeast and maritime Canada as well, and mapped for every 30-meter pixel its spectral trajectory over the last 40 or so years, and looked at all the harvesting and different disturbances that are happening, and been able to update these biomass maps going forward using a system like that. We also have Valeria just finished her master's thesis, and we're working on a publication of some really fantastic work where she's looked at using MODIS data, which you can get basically phenology curves over the time period, the last couple decades that's been collecting data, and you can look at how that has been changing in the state of Maine, and we've seen some really dramatic changes even in just 20 years. That the onset of the growing season, especially in the northern parts of the state, has advanced by at least a week and sometimes more. And then she was able to model that and figure out the drivers of those changes and project those into the future, which is really cool work too. And then I wanted to just mention before I go, we're going off the title a little bit, but we also work in systems outside of forest and outside of Maine, and another graduate student that's working with us, Wouter Hansen, who we won't hear from today, but he and I and other collaborators have worked for a long time up with various NASA and Department of Energy projects in Alaska, and using all sorts of different remote sensing technologies based on the scaling problem. So trying to figure out landscape changes due to permafrost and what the consequences are for the carbon cycle, using things like UAVs and airborne hyperspectral data collections and satellite imagery as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Sylvia to talk about the JEDI project.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And basically, I'm going to be share a little bit more detail with regards to the JEDI project. And in continuation of what Dan explained, the forest plays a very important role with regards to storing carbon. And of course, because it stores carbon, it plays a very big role with regards to climate change mitigation. And there is a large uncertainty within our knowledge of carbon flux and carbon stocks. And so with this project, JEDI Force project, which is means for forest carbon estimation, we want to support the JEDI mission, NASA JEDI mission, by answering questions with regards to what is the carbon balance of the Earth's forest, mainly focusing on the temperate forest, and for us, it's the boreal region, and quantifying it by creating these forest estimation maps. And so in that regard, JEDI is a very new spaceborne LiDAR equipment. And so we're very excited to understand the information, and it provides detailed information about the forest structure and even topography. So JEDI basically is stationed on an international spatial station, and it covers the between 51.6 degrees north and south of the equator. And it utilizes laser or LiDAR remote sensing principles by sending down light photons, and this information is sent back to the sensor, and basically it captures the intensity of what is sent or returned, sorry. And this information now is captured using full waveform data. You know, we are used to using the point clouds, but in this situation, it is waveform information. And so we want to integrate different types of LiDAR information. And we basically will try to understand how accurate it is in terms of capturing carbon information. And so this information, the waveform information, is basically providing data about the canopy height and the profile of the canopy. And this information will be put into models where we're able to understand the above ground carbon estimation and basically make assessments about the change of carbon. So here we start to explore the information in this regard, and we have 3 different types of data sets. This is the airborne LiDAR, which comes from the NASA Goddard, the G-Light information. And then you have JEDI and ISAT. I want to say that these information, of course, is captured as snapshots. It's not wall to wall. So we'll be utilizing this information and putting it into a model using random forest, which we'll elaborate on a little bit later. But looking at the information, we see that you have strong, relatively good correlation with regards to the relative heights across the different data sets, as you can see here. It's in the graph on the upper right-hand side, we have some negative values, but that is because of the elevation information emitting from the ground data. Here you have another of our study sites. And here I wanted to show a little bit about how it captures disturbances. And it basically shows quite clearly and very detailed in how it is able to capture the gaps with regards to disturbances within the forest. And additionally, so here you could see the metrics with regards to the relative height of the forest. And basically, you see a gap here with a JEDI snapshot being captured, and it is able to see the difference from the different heights from, let's say, 25 to 0. So it's able to capture that information quite clearly. So it also, I want to share as well that you're able to put this information within a cartographic within a cartographic ability for you to understand the information. And in addition to that, put it with regards to the elevation data. So Wheatland Lab intends to continue to support the JEDI mission with regards to evaluating the use of a multi-stage joint model for predicting above biomass using JEDI data, where we're able to fill in the blanks. And of course, this information, previously the publications developed utilize simulated JEDI, but now you have post-launch information, so it's real-time data. Also, the information provided is within the same, or the information collected is within the same date and time, so we'll be able to use coincidental data sets to create these wall-to-wall maps. And of course, we want to be able to utilize a Bayesian inference for propagation of uncertainty to enable the development of accurate maps. So JEDI hopes that this Wheatland Lab, with the use of JEDI data, hopes to enhance the methodology to estimate biomass over large regional scales. And of course, we want to be able to support areas where data is lacking. And I want to just put a jot in here that this information is freely available on the LPDAC and the ORNL website, NASA websites. So if you want to explore a little bit, you're able to do so. And we hope that this information will inform climate mitigation policy initiatives and improve reporting. Most importantly, we want to be able to support forest managers and landowners to manage carbon and participate in carbon markets. So I want to thank you for your time, and may the Wheatland Force be with you.
All right, thank you, Sylvia. And good afternoon, I'm Dave Sandilands. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone this afternoon. As the resident pilot here in the Wheatland Lab, I'd like to give a brief introduction to some of the equipment that we operate, as well as a quick pictorial overview of what an image processing workflow looks like, and then provide a few examples of what you can do with aerial photography. So the University of Maine owns a Cessna 172, pictured here in the lower right corner. It's used for flight training and rentals, but we have priority use for research projects. It's equipped with a removable camera pod that you can see mounted on the bottom of the plane here. That's where we mount the cameras that we fly. And it's a pretty nice airplane. It has a Garmin G1000 avionics system so that we can program our flight missions into the plane directly and be able to pull them up on the screen on the instrument panel so we can follow along as we're flying. We have a handful of different UAVs that we fly as well, including 2 RTK units that are considered survey grade. We can get very good accuracy on those projects, generally within a few centimeters. So those are very useful. We have both true color and CIR cameras that we fly both on the airplane as well as on our UAVs. And most recently, we added a thermal sensor that we fly on our large Matrice UAV that we just started using. Here in the Wheatland Lab, we have a few high performance workstations that we use so that we can process projects township scale, even larger potentially. And we also have a resource here at UMaine through the Department of Industrial Cooperation, where we are permitted to operate on a fee for service basis under the umbrella of research and development. And we've worked with several outside groups over the years using this framework, and I'll provide a couple examples of some of those projects here in a few minutes. So when processing digital photogrammetry projects, we use a method called structure from motion, or SFM. It's been around for a number of years. You might informally hear it referred to as PHODAR or photogrammetric LiDAR, because the file types and formats are very similar to what you would get from a LiDAR acquisition. To start off, you have to have overlapping photos. When we fly, we typically acquire photos with a high percentage of overlap so that we can see objects on the ground from as many different perspectives as possible. But this method does also work well for older, more traditional photo collections, like ones you'd be used to seeing with 60% overlap, 30% side to side. It does work for that as well. Next, that's followed up by feature extraction, where the software algorithms identify and extract features within the photos, leading to a process called feature matching or image correlation, where the software starts to build that relationship between the same features visible on overlapping photos. Next is what's called a bundle adjustment, and I'll just describe this as really fancy math that goes on behind the scenes. And here the software further builds that relationship between two-dimensional photo points and the sensor to predict 3D point locations that have X, Y, and Z coordinates. You can further refine this model by correcting for various camera and lens distortions. You can even add control points so that your project has X, Y, and Z geographic coordinate information as well. And finally, what you get is a dense point cloud. And this is very similar to what you would see with a LiDAR data set. You can color it in a variety of different ways, by elevation, for example, but you have that added benefit in that it was created directly from photos. So you have all of that photographic information as well. And from here, you can create a whole variety of different products like geometrically corrected orthomosaics, digital surface models where the pixel values represent elevation. With a few added steps, you can turn these into digital height models, which includes canopy height models. And here your pixel values represent height above ground, where ground is basically an elevation of 0. And you can get even really fancier and create textured 3D models. This is similar to what you would see if you're experienced with looking at Google Earth, where you zoom in and you can see the sides of buildings and other objects in 3D. So it's pretty neat. So some of the projects that we've created using the structure from motion methods, true color and color infrared orthomosaics, you can see here. Typically when we're flying over forested areas, we like to use our near infrared cameras. You can see an example of the same area in both photos here on the right side. The near infrared is really good at species discrimination. It's also pretty useful for making assessments of forest health. As I mentioned, we can do some fee-for-service work. Here's an example from a project where we worked for an engineering firm who contracted through the town of Orland to plan a proposed transfer station site. So we provided survey grade 2D and 3D map products for him to do his planning work. And this is an orthomosaic here composed of just over 400 individual photos that were seamlessly stitched together at really high resolution. And as far as I know, the transfer station was finally built. I haven't been back to the site since then. We've also worked with a handful of mills throughout the state over the past few years to evaluate the use of UAV imagery in creating elevation models so that we can help them estimate their mill yard inventories. One particular mill we worked with, and they were so impressed that they ended up bringing us back every month so that we could provide updated inventories, and they used that information to guide their monthly wood buying. As I mentioned, we have a thermal camera. We worked with folks in the wildlife department here this past fall who were looking to identify areas where groundwater was coming into wetland area. And the idea being if the air temperature is cold and the ground is cold, the groundwater is still warm underneath. So when that comes to the surface, we can find that in the thermal imagery As you can see here on the right, those brighter yellow areas are the groundwater. And just from looking at that with a regular photo on the left, you would never know that that's there. And lastly, in 2020, the Sewell Company transferred their collection of film over to the Fogler Library here on campus, just about 3,000 rolls, I believe, of film. So I worked with the librarian in charge of that collection this past fall to see if we could process the scanned historical imagery using the same SFM methods that we use on digital imagery and see what kind of accuracy we can get. And I took a collection of images over Penobscot County from 1977 and processed them through Structure for Motion. And I was able to extract heights of buildings that were present back then with a surprisingly good degree of accuracy just from the photos alone, within a meter of accuracy compared to what the heights of those buildings are that we were able to measure today. So very impressed there, and lots of research potential for that as well going forward. And with that, happy to answer any questions later on, and I will turn things over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Dave. All right, I'm Stephanie, and I'm going to be talking about enhanced forest inventories that Dave had mentioned earlier. So what are they? It's when we take our ground forest inventories and we incorporate the LiDAR estimates into that, and we can estimate attributes such as like height, basal area, volume, and more, and it enhances our forest inventory. And so to create the enhanced forest inventory, we use an area-based approach, which again is when we're relating the LiDAR variables to our target inventory attributes, which were our ground plot locations. And so we have these LiDAR variables and they're used as predictors, and they exist as a tessellated grid over our area of interest. And each grid cell usually represents roughly the size of our plot size. And then after the area-based approach model is applied, each grid cell has a prediction that can be aggregated with our other predictions to create a stand level prediction. And so what does this look like? Well, we collect our ground plot information, we gather our LiDAR information, and then we create our tessellated grid, which again, those grid cells are roughly the size of our ground plot size. And so what we do is we clip our LiDAR data to our ground plots, and then we delineate our stand. And then we can add in our predictive modeling and run our wall-to-wall metrics. And you can see there that Y hat, that's going to be our target inventory attribute, and those X's are our LiDAR variables. So for this example, our Y hat is going to be volume for the stand. So we're going to run those predictions, and then each of those grid cells will have a Y value, and then we're going to aggregate all of those Ys, and we can extrapolate all of that information to the stand. So in this example here, our stands have the volume predictions. So to create our enhanced forest inventories, we use non-parametric models. The specific one that we are using is random forest, which is really good for big data sets, which LiDAR is huge data. And so we derive our predictions from existing forest characteristics. And to do that, we use our target and reference data. So again, we're collecting our ground plot inventories, we're collecting our LiDAR data, we're creating that tessellated grid and clipping our ground plot to our LiDAR data, running the models. So for this example, we have plot 1. We're going to predict basal area for the other plots. So we have plot 1, our data for basal area is 100. Plot 5, our data for basal area is 80. We're going to put in that data into the random forest algorithm, and that random forest algorithm is going to create hundreds of decision trees. So again, with plot 1, the basal area was 100. That algorithm is going to create these trees. So it could predict 90 for the basal area for the plot next to it, or 100. And then after that decision tree comes up with its prediction of, let's say 90 for the basal area, it's going to aggregate all of those other decisions from the other decision trees, and whichever is the most popular prediction is going to be that prediction for that area. So our output basal area predictions, you can see that the area next to plot 1 was 90. And so we can run these models all day, but we have to figure out if they're correct or not. So we need to validate them. So for example, we have the PEF. We have the LiDAR for the PEF. We have our ground plot data for the PEF. We're going to clip that LiDAR data to our ground plots, and then we're going to run our wall-to-wall metrics, and then we're going to get those predictions back. And so to validate, we can apply that model to the demerit, run the wall-to-wall metrics. It's going to give us those predictions for the demerit, and then we're going to go back out into the demerit forest and then collect inventory roughly where those predictions were spat out by the model. And then if our inventory matches those predictions, then we know that our model has been validated. And that's EFIs. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Great. Thank you, Steph. Okay, so in addition to all this great research and project-based work, and before I touch on stakeholder engagement activities at the Wheatland Lab, you know, it probably goes without saying, you might guess that we do a lot of you know, support for education through the School of Forest Resources, focused primarily on, of course, GIS and remote sensing based coursework for both undergraduate and graduate students. So I'll just sort of mention that as well. A number of course options available for both undergrads and graduate students. And then we also have done, not all that frequently to date, but we also have done some undergraduate internship programs as well with some of our external stakeholders. So that's all, you know, sort of educational based activities that we support here at the Wheatland Lab. More specifically to stakeholder engagement with a variety of groups, primarily focused on Maine's forest industry stakeholders, but also conservation partners like the Nature Conservancy, Maine Audubon, and then of course, state agency stakeholders as well, Maine Natural Areas Program, BPL, and other groups. Dan talked about the NASA Carbon Monitoring System project, and there is a specific stakeholder engagement part of that project, which will be doing more work on this summer, and I believe over the next 2 to 3 years, where, you know, we seek to engage with our stakeholders, talking about the research that we're planning for this project, and providing an opportunity for really for our stakeholders to help drive that research. And so, what are some, you know, CMS developed tools and programs specific to Maine's forest that will really help inform stakeholders and forest landowners in Maine, you know, better understand carbon dynamics in the state, how, you know, future climate projections could impact their management decisions and other decisions related to forests in Maine and forest carbon and climate change going forward. So we're really excited about that stakeholder engagement piece to the carbon monitoring system project that we have here in the Wheatland Lab. I also want to mention that we do a number of workshops and seminars. We have an EFI workshop that we're going to offer for the New England Society of American Foresters winter meeting. That'll be in Portland, Maine, coming up in late March. And that will be a hands-on workshop, just a sort of a half day, where, you know, you bring your laptop, you install the software that we'll be using, and we'll cover a lot of the basics and the core concepts of LiDAR-based EFI that Stephanie has just spoke about, and then give participants the opportunity to get some hands-on experience and actually run some of these models, build the relationships and run the models. And that's a more streamlined workflow for for the workshop, but really just to, provide an opportunity to hopefully get a broader understanding of how it actually works in a real world setting. And then, some of we've got a fairly active Wheatland seminar program. We've done over 35 seminars since we began the seminar series in 2016. The past 2 years has been a real challenge, I'll be honest, with COVID, both for our workshops, in-person workshops, and in-person seminars. So we're always looking for recruitment opportunities, and they're sort of broadly based remote sensing and GIS focused seminars, but with a natural resource or a forestry perspective. So if any of you are interested in, maybe offering to give a Wheatland seminar, we'd love to hear from you. And then of course we do post, we don't have the full catalog of seminars recorded, but once we had the capability to do so, we began recording those seminars and posting them on the Wheatland YouTube channel. So I'd encourage you to check that out. Also this summer, we plan to offer a UAS workshop. This will be hopefully a 2-day hands-on workshop where participants will come to the Wheatland Lab and with their own equipment, so their UAVs and processing software and laptops, and really, take it through the full workflow from, what are considerations when you're working to get your remote pilot certification, things that you want to prepare for there and consider as you prepare to take that test to get your certification, all the way through, mission planning, flight dynamics, actually get out there. We do have a couple of areas here on the Orono campus where we can fly, and we do have permission for workshop participants that have their remote pilot certifications to actually fly their own equipment at our testing area on campus. So we'll be out there, sort of a combination of, in the lab work and hands-on out there in the field flying the UAVs. And then post-processing and generating some of the products that Dave mentioned in the structure from motion focused workflows. So we're excited about that and hope to offer that this summer in August. And then, of course, sort of on an ongoing basis, we certainly are able to offer stakeholder sort of driven workshops, custom workshops, and we have done those in the past and are always up for working with specific stakeholder groups to develop custom workshops for their needs and their personnel. And then finally, ongoing help desk support. We're always here to help when and where we can. So I'd encourage you to reach out with any questions anytime. And then in the introductions, Matt mentioned I'm the chair of the Maine Geospatial Institute. And of course, Matt is a fellow executive committee member on MGI's executive committee. So statewide collaborative across the University of Maine system. And I'm sure many of you on the webinar this afternoon are aware of that and of some of the work that we do. We recently held a partnership summit. This was the second one in the past 2 years. The first one was just before COVID in January 2020. And then we just had a really good meeting, a virtual one this time due to COVID on January 13 among the MGI, the Maine Geo Library, and then of course MEGUG folks. And it was a good set of updates and a chance to talk about some of the challenges that the three groups share in terms of promoting geospatial science and technology in the state of Maine. And one of the important outcomes of this was the formation of an ad hoc committee to try to figure out some ways to most efficiently address, sort of long-term fiscal challenges among the groups, going after collaborative grants and some opportunities there. Hopefully improved opportunities for grant funding with the new infrastructure bill that was passed last year. And then also just looking at, going forward, using geospatial science and technology to better prepare for a changing climate in the state. And then also just general advocacy and both at the state legislative level, but also just across the board, across stakeholder groups, across Maine, and how geospatial science and technology can be better utilized to help solve any number of challenges. Tora Johnson, a fellow executive committee member, is also doing work out of the University of Maine at Machias on a geospatial workforce survey. Stay tuned for more information on that. That should be coming out soon. And then that will help inform another effort that she's leading on workforce training and GIS micro-credentials within the University of Maine system. So that's exciting new work led by Tora and others affiliated with MGI. And then, of course, there's been a long-standing GIS certificate that's sort of system-wide, and then a new GIS minor based out of the University of Maine at Farmington. So that's exciting educational opportunities for GIS in Maine. And then also, we hope to, some of my colleagues in MGI have, done, long-standing work in high school and early college projects and workshops. And, we certainly hope to build on those successes and going forward, do more work at that level to promote, greater access and awareness of geospatial education opportunities in Maine. And I believe that's it. So we'll open it up for any questions, and my colleagues here in the Wheatland Lab, please chime in with anything I might have missed. Oh, yes.
Sure. So it looks like we have a question from a person asking about the SFM. Which software did you use for that?
So we use AgSoft Metashape. We've had that for many years, and we have licenses for it. So yeah, that's our go-to SFM processing software.
Okay. And then we have another question about wondering what data you plan to use to fill in the gaps for the JEDI grid transects. And if you could describe a bit more about the two-stage modeling process. Will JEDI data be used for training validation at second stage models?
I can take a shot quickly at that. It's complicated, as you might imagine, but basically we have to fill in gaps in these sampling data sets like JEDI and ISAT2 by the two-stage means that you can use other data that you do have wall-to-wall to essentially predict what the JEDI would look like if it did go over that spot on the forest. So we use a bunch of other spatial wall-to-wall covariates that we do have, primarily from Landsat and Sentinel, where we get spectral data. And then we also, as Sylvia was showing, that there are relationships with of forest height with disturbances. And so a big predictor of the canopy height metrics from JEDI would be the disturbance history metrics that I mentioned come from Landtrender that the former student Jack had run over the Northeast. So basically it's it's almost a kitchen sink approach. You just throw everything that you have at these models, and random forest will use all these big data to figure out which variables are contributing most to your model, and then being able to sort of predict those JEDI metrics where we don't actually have JEDI measurements. And then once you have that, then you have essentially simulated JEDI metrics wall to wall over the region. And now you can co-locate those with ground measurements that you do have from whether Stephanie's out there collecting data, as she mentioned, or forest inventory and analysis data from the Forest Service and similar networks in Canada. And then we can actually make those biomass or other kind of enhanced forest inventory models based on connecting the ground data to where we've simulated the JEDI. That's sort of the second stage in the two-stage modeling process. So that was maybe butchered it a little bit, but it's a complicated process to explain, but that's the gist of it.
And I thought Sylvia had mentioned that there was interest, or you're trying to find a way to augment that with LiDAR data, but how would that work for such a wide swath of the Earth's surface, or did I misunderstand that?
Well, the JEDI is LiDAR data from it's being collected from the International Space Station, and so it essentially gives you that sort of the same information that an airborne LiDAR would give you, but it's only for these sort of snapshots. If you imagine it's somebody on the space station shining a flashlight down as it goes over and getting these little snapshot pictures of the forest structure. And so we augmented, as she mentioned, with there is a spaceborne orbiting satellite called ICESat-2 with a green laser that gets also some profile information. And then we have a kind of a history of working with NASA Goddard Space Flight Center that Sylvia mentioned, that they do airborne surveys up here with their LiDAR instruments. So we have a bunch of different, like I said, the kitchen sink with a bunch of different things to throw into the mix to kind of piece all this information together.
And is the LiDAR, I mean, obviously the resolution is not as high, but is there as much for other refraction issues, or is the point cloud different at all with it so far away from a normal, like?
Yeah, those are good questions, and that's why we're trying to explore that, where we do have coincident observations among all those different sensors, and so we can see how well they match up, particularly if we can figure out where we do have the JEDI that happened across where the NASA airborne G-Light has, and we do have some places. Sylvia showed a plot of that, one of our preliminary results, and it actually looks real good. And if there's anything, it's just some biases that could be corrected. So we think we're dealing with some good data, even though it is crazy that it's so far away.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We have a few other questions coming in. One from Justin: was there an uncertainty estimate associated with the Maine forest take up of 75% of annual carbon emission statement?
That's a good question, and not really. In terms of a quantitative assessment in this version 1, this was quite literally a bunch of us getting together with an Excel spreadsheet. With Ivan Fernandez, it might have been a back of an actual envelope, but essentially that's what this was, and it was our first cut at it. So, but we used, if you go to the website, you can see all the sources of data that we have. We didn't just make it up, but yeah, it was kind of collecting what we could from the different sectors to put it all together, and so we have, and this sounds funny, but it's actually the same kind of thing that's done at the IPCC level, that does the global emissions reporting, that there's a lot of expert judgment on these. And so we have a lot of confidence in our forest number because it comes from a wide range of measurements in that from the FIA data, essentially. So we feel pretty good about that estimate. Whereas estimates from the blue carbon or the wetlands, where we have very little data, those have much larger uncertainty for sure. So that's sort of the expert assessment, but given your point, all this other stuff we're talking about, the JEDI estimates, the airborne LiDAR that we're doing, the stuff that Stephanie is working on, all that's designed to put a quantitative estimate on that uncertainty. And so not only will we give you our best guess at what the forest carbon is for the state of Maine at any given year, but how uncertain that estimate is, plus or minus.
Well, it's the work you're doing. I mean, there's so much more involved in what you can get across in a 25-minute lunch and learn. So we certainly appreciate that. And it's really interesting, you know, much different than traditional school of forestry, guy or gal with a tripod in the woods trying to shoot some timber, right? This is really complicated, great stuff. We've got a couple other questions. And Matt, if you have any questions, please chime in. One I'm seeing here is interesting. What type of ground truth data do you use to calibrate or validate your model for your biomass?
That's you, Stephanie.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So we collect a lot of different data. I mean, when you get your ground plot data, you're getting your volume, your basal area, your height, and all of that. So that's what we're using. So you can estimate when you're using the LiDAR data to create the EFIs, you're extrapolating from those ground plots the rest of the stand, and it's enhancing that. So what we're using to validate that is we're creating these predictions for this other forest stand, and then we're going out there and we're collecting the DVH, the height, the volume for that stand. And does that make sense?
Yeah, and so there's a question about FIA. We do, yes, we use FIA for ground truthing aggregated. It's, as some of you may know, it's difficult.
And FIA is what?
FIA, the U.S. Forest Service Inventory and Analysis Program, so they're ground plots all over the country. You're not necessarily allowed, the general public isn't allowed to know exactly where those plot locations are. We need to know exactly where they are in order to do this, which we can do, but they're also not designed that well for remote sensing, and that's a whole other topic we'll do another seminar on. But in the meantime, Steph, one of the things you should mention is the type of ground plot data that you're looking at.
Yes.
Fixed versus variable.
Yeah. So I'm looking at fixed radius plots versus variable radius plots. And so I should have explained it on my slides. I had the circle plots and like triangle plots, and those circle plots were the fixed radius and those triangle plots were the variable radius plots. So what I'm trying to do is figure out which type of plot is the best plot to use to calibrate that LiDAR data. And so that's where the tessellated grid, it's that uniform grid, that's where that question comes up, because the variable radius plots, they don't have, the same area per plot. So that's what I'm really trying to look at, or one of the things I'm looking at.
Great.
I don't know how much time we have to go for you guys. We're okay on this end, but there are, looking at the questions, I'll do the ISAT2 data is similar. It's a green laser instead of a near infrared laser, so it's not as great for vegetation, but that's why they use it for ice in glaciers and things like that. But it does produce a vegetation profile, at least it looks pretty good. So there are products you can download, again, freely available, that you can look at. It gives you a similar sort of height profile that the Jedi would, but the ISAT is in nice transects as opposed to little snapshots. And then let's see, we entered the FIA, the ephemeral streams. How about you infer them from the
Yeah, I would say that's probably the standard practice for ground truthing. Some of the thermal surveys for groundwater systems that Dave mentioned. So that would be a good way to ground truth that.
Yeah, so basically you can use the LiDAR to model the ground surface and then figure out where those would likely be. That's pretty standard practice with the hydro modeling. And that kind of goes along with the last question. I'm a little, we don't have poor ground. That's the whole point of LiDAR, is you get good, well, you don't penetrate the ground, but you penetrate the canopy to get to the ground. So you have that's the whole idea of LiDAR, which is why it's better than photogrammetry that Dave mentioned, is you can actually penetrate the canopy, so you get a very accurate elevation of the ground, of the terrain. And then you also get various returns across through the canopy. So basically, once you find the top of the canopy and you know the actual elevation of the ground, you just subtract it to it, and then you've got your tree heights.
Excellent stuff. Folks, if there are any other questions, please throw them in the chat. One thing that did pop up for me, I was thinking, Tony, you mentioned you're doing Wheatland Lab seminars. I assume those are online. How would folks submit a talk idea to you guys?
So I would encourage folks just to email any one of us, but me more specifically, and we could set that up. We don't have an actual schedule for this spring semester, and really the past couple of years, we've done 2 or 3 a semester. And pre-COVID, we always had a full schedule of 6 to 8. So it has been really challenging during the pandemic, but we're doing them virtual now because of COVID. So we can really set one up in fairly short notice. So if anyone has any interesting ideas, or if you know of individuals that might be able to give a good talk, please send them my way, or send me their contact info, and I'd be happy to reach out.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks so much, everyone. It was really interesting to see what you all are working on and how you're working on it, at least a snapshot of that. And if any of you were interested in sharing a little bit more in depth your research at any time at one of our lunch and learns, we'd love to have you back. Matt, unless you have any other questions that come to mind.
No, if people are interested in giving a talk for this sort of environment, please reach out to us and we can make that happen.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Again, we really appreciate it. And we will have this recording up on our YouTube channel shortly. And thank you, Matt, for helping out. Everybody have a great rest of the day, and we will talk with you in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.